All right, today we're tackling something huge. How do we actually read an ancient book, like the Bible, on its own terms? Without all our modern baggage getting in the way. We're going to walk through a method that really helps us hear what the text is actually saying, getting us so much closer to its original meaning. Let's dive in.
You know that feeling, right? You open up a book like the Bible, and you just feel this disconnect. You're reading the words on the page, but the world behind them feels so distant, almost like a foreign country. If you've ever felt that, trust me, you are not alone. It's a super common experience when a modern person tries to engage with an ancient document.
So here's the absolute core of the issue. The problem usually isn't the text itself, it's the modern lens we're looking through. We come to it with the best intentions, but our own assumptions can act like a filter, and sometimes that filter is so strong that we end up, as our source material puts it, undermining the very text we seek to honor.
And wow, this slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? It's a total clash of worlds. On one side, you've got us and our world, where we often have this neat line between what's secular and what's sacred. But then you look at the ancient world, and the supernatural wasn't even a question. It was just an assumed reality, an unseen realm buzzing with divine beings. That was just normal. That was how the world worked. And if we ignore that difference, it's like trying to understand a foreign culture with no guide at all.
Okay, so how do we fix this? How do we bridge that gap? Well, that's what we're going to lay out today. Here's our roadmap. We've talked about the problem. Now we're going to explore a three-step solution. First, we're going to enter their world. Second, we'll learn to ask the right kind of questions. And third, we'll see the whole story. And at the end, we'll see just how rewarding this whole thing can be.
If you boil this entire method down to one single idea, one golden rule, it would be this: let the text speak before we speak for it. It's all about a shift in our posture, really, moving away from imposing our ideas on the text and instead just humbly listening to what it has to say. All right, so step one is all about entering their world. And I want you to think about it like this. You're not a home renovator coming in to update an ancient house to modern standards. No, you're a respectful visitor trying to understand that house completely on its own terms. To really do this, we've got to try and rebuild their conceptual world inside our own heads. For the people who wrote the Bible, the supernatural wasn't some theory, it was reality. Spiritual beings were active players in the story of history. Take a word like covenant. We might hear that and think contract, but for them, it was this all-encompassing loyal relationship, often sealed with a life or death oath. Just understanding that one concept changes everything. This ancient context isn't a barrier to understanding, it's the only gateway in.
Okay, once we've stepped into their world, we can move on to step two, asking text-driven questions. You see, good interpretation doesn't actually start with having all the answers. It starts with asking better questions, and specifically, questions that come from the text itself, not from our own 21st century agendas.
So how does that work in practice? It's actually a pretty simple but disciplined process. First, you just read the passage really closely. Then, instead of asking, "So what does this say about this modern issue I care about?" you ask questions like, why did the author choose that specific word? Or why is this little detail included right here? And maybe most importantly, we have to learn to resist forcing the text to answer questions it never set out to address in the first place. At the end of the day, this is really about respect. It's about respecting the text's own boundaries. When we try to force it to weigh in on modern science or politics, we're basically talking over it. We need to learn to just listen to the conversation it's actually having.
And that leads us perfectly into our third and final step, which is all about one thing: seeing the whole story. This is where context becomes king. Context within a single book and context across the entire biblical storyline.
Think about it. Reading a single verse in isolation? It's like trying to figure out a 1,000-piece puzzle by just staring at one single blue piece. Sure, you know it's blue, but is it the sky? Is it water? A piece of clothing? You have absolutely no idea because you're missing the entire picture.
But the magic happens when you start seeing how that one piece connects to all the others. When you see how later biblical writers pick up on themes and even specific words from earlier ones, the whole epic story starts to come into focus. This is called intertextuality, and it's what shows us that the Bible isn't just a random library of books, but a deeply coherent story unfolding from beginning to end.
Now, another huge part of seeing the whole story is what we call genre sensitivity. It sounds academic, but it's super practical. It just means recognizing that poetry communicates truth in a very different way than a legal document does. A historical story works differently than a prophetic vision.
If you misread the genre, you can get into all sorts of trouble, like taking something deeply symbolic way too literally, or maybe dismissing a historical account as just a metaphor.
Okay, so we've walked through all these steps. It sounds like a lot of work, right? So, what's the payoff? Why go through all this trouble? Well, the result is a reading of the text that is just so much deeper, so much more authentic, and honestly, so much more coherent.
When you read this way, the benefits are huge. First, your understanding becomes historically grounded. It's connected to the real world it came from. You start to see this incredibly coherent story that runs through the whole thing. You're actually being more faithful to what the text itself is saying. And you avoid that big trap of reducing the Bible to just a moral rulebook or, a collection of nice quotes.
Now, I know as some of you might be thinking, does all this kind of analytical stuff get in the way of faith? But the source material makes a powerful point. This method doesn't weaken faith. It refines it. It helps you build a faith that's grounded not our own modern assumptions, but in the text itself, taking seriously what it is, what it assumes, and what it proclaims.
So, I want to leave you with a final question to chew on. What might happen? What could change in our own understanding if we stop trying so hard to make the Bible sound modern and instead just learn to listen to it as this powerful, ancient voice from another world? A voice that maybe still speaks today precisely because we haven't tried to tame it.